much, community. So great to be here with you. I am Ellen, the dog trainer, a certified professional dog trainer and a certified behavior adjustment training instructor.
And I'm Kristin. I'm also a certified professional trainer and also a certified behavior consultant. And we're here today with my dog Bentley, a 5-year-old Australian cattle dog, and Simon, he's a client's dog of mine. He's a 2-year-old standard poodle.
And today we are here to help you help your dogs. Our topic for this month's Facebook Live is going to be all about dog body language. When we can learn what our dog is telling us by just looking at their body, it opens up a whole new communication channel, and it kind of takes out the guesswork as to what's going on.
Exactly, and it's really important for us to look at the dog as a whole. So today we're going to talk specifically about the individual components that make up body language and what different signs might mean in different circumstances. But know that when we look at a dog and try to determine, is the dog happy, is it stressed, is it afraid, we're looking at each of those individual pieces combined as a whole.
That's right. So there's some very key things to look for, as Kristin was saying, in different body parts. It's first important to know what your dog looks like when he or she is happy and relaxed. Those are some really great signs, right? They make us really happy and relaxed. So what should we look for in the eyes? I would say one of the signs is really soft eyes.
Correct. So that's as opposed to, say, a hard stare. And I know that that's something that's usually easier to describe with some visuals, which is why we have some assistants today. So even though you guys probably can't see Simon's eyes, or
maybe we'll go a little closer to the camera.
Yeah, so they're fairly relaxed at the moment. You know, they're not overly excited about anything. Obviously, they're not greeting anybody new, so they're not wiggly and goofy and silly, but they're not fixated on anything either. So their eyes are what we would call soft.
Another sign of a really happy face, in addition to those soft eyes, would be the ears. Check out Simon's ears, and what do they look like to you? I would say
relaxed.
Relaxed, right? Hi, Simon. Nice
an
to
important
see you.
note here too, as we go through and describe different components of body language, is we're always basing everything off of the dog's what we call neutral positions. So one way to think about it is if you look at your dog when they're roaming around your living room and nothing really exciting is going on, wherever their tail normally lies, wherever their ears normally sit on their head, that would be what we call their neutral body positions or their neutral body language. And you'll see some of those components, whether it's their tail or their ears or their overall body posture, change depending on what enters their environment or what it is that they're interacting with.
Exactly. So we were talking, as Kristin said, it's so important to know about the neutral positions and some happy positions. If Simon were a bit concerned, his ears and his eyes might change a little bit, as well as his mouth, and again, the whole body. But we're going to talk a little bit about the eyes and the ears. And let's talk a little bit about the head right now, if you're good with that. So Simon is a little bit more alert. We can tell that by his ears are changing a little bit. Look at the way he's raised his head up to focus on Kristin.
Yep. Partially it's because I have a cookie in my hand, so he's after the goodies.
But he's also still pretty happy and pretty relaxed. We can see that. Well, his mouth was open, but what did he just do?
I just saw him sniff the ground.
Just sniff the ground, okay.
From my position, I didn't see.
All right,
awesome. He
awesome.
offered a yawn, or was that what that was?
Yeah, so one of the things that we can look for with our dogs, if they might be a little bit stressed, with the eyes, you might see what we call a whale eye. You'll see the whites of their eyes. That's a really important sign to look for in a dog. And why is that?
So a whale eye typically amounts to some sort of stress. So probably the most classic example where we might see this are dogs who like to guard objects or who maybe aren't comfortable with somebody or something entering their personal space. And really what we're looking for when we talk about whale eye is that flash of the whites of their eyes. So most of the time when it happens, let's say for example you have a dog that's in possession of their food bowl or a toy, and somebody reaches their hand down to try to take it away, what you might see is that dog keep its face straight ahead over the object, but their eyes will sort of flash up at you and you'll see more of the whites of their eyes than normal. And that's actually a warning sign. So that's their way of sort of telling you to back off, that they want to keep that object in that example, or that they want a little bit more space from you. So their eyes are really a good way to sort of help you determine in that moment what it is that they're asking for or what it is that they need.
Yeah, definitely. And for parents, if you have kids, or if you have kids with dogs or without dogs, if you see them hugging the dog and you see the dog have the white eye part showing pretty dramatically, that's information for you. Pay attention to that and ask your child to stop holding the dog for sure, or just back away in whatever circumstance where you see that whale eye.
Correct, and unfortunately we see a lot of pictures online, especially on Facebook these days, of kids smothering dogs, and while some of them don't look like they're in any danger, there definitely are some concerning photos, and whale eye is usually present in a lot of them, so that's a bit concerning. We want to move on to their mouths.
Yeah, let's.
So Simon's offering some lip licks right now, and that could be for a couple different reasons. It could be he's just salivating more because he knows that cookies have been happening recently. If you look at both of them in their tongue positions, Bentley's obviously is hanging out of his mouth a little bit more. So normally when we talk about whether or not a dog's relaxed, you're going to look for more of an open mouth versus a tight, closed mouth. And it's not that dogs don't lay around sometimes with their mouths closed, but particularly we're looking at the amount of tension in their jaw. So if your dog's mouth is open and relaxed and their body language is relatively neutral, they're probably pretty comfortable. But you might notice, especially let's say if you have a dog that is concerned about other dogs or maybe concerned about strangers entering their environment, you might see that when that happens, the dog's mouth will suddenly close very tight, and a lot of times it's even a precursor to a bark.
Great information. I think actually what we saw is I was scratching Simon's head, and Simon and I have just met, so he may have been a little uncomfortable with me touching him for that long or touching him in that particular spot. So as Kristin talked about, the mouth is also a really great indicator for us to know whether or not the dog is super comfortable with what's happening to him or her in that moment. So going from an open mouth to a closed mouth, or seeing that tongue come out and flick, that's a great sign for you to look for to go, you know what? Not 100% super comfortable. Doesn't mean they're having a panic attack, but it's an early warning sign.
Yeah, especially if it's accompanied with what we call a head turn. So dogs very deliberately will disengage and briefly look away from something as what we call a naturally distance increasing request. So it's sort of their way of asking for a little bit of a break. And I didn't see Ellen scratching him, so that very well could have been it. And I did notice, though, that he did look away while he was licking his lips a little bit. So good information there. Moving on to their tails. You'll see that Simon's is actually a little bit lower than it normally is, and that could be for a couple of reasons. My guess is because this is a new environment for him, and he may be feeling a little bit stressed. You'll see if Ellen works with him a little bit and maybe offers some cookies, it might help him relax, and you might see his tail start to come up a little bit more as it did when he sat. So really, again, based off of your dog's neutral tail position, we want to look at as they're interacting with their environment, do their tails get higher or lower than their normal neutral position? Higher than neutral typically is some sort of arousal or excitement, while lowered usually is more indicative of stress or even fear, especially if it's tucked really tight under their bodies. That's a pretty scared dog.
Kristin brought some really good treats today.
Yes.
And we're using them to help our dogs feel a little more comfortable in a situation that they haven't been in before. And we really appreciate you bringing your dogs today and having them help participate in our session. So Kristin was just talking about the tail. Again, a great indicator. Really get to know your dog's tail and what its natural carriage is. This may be very natural for it to be high, sitting up like that, right?
Correct. And something I want to point out too is when we talk about tail, we're not necessarily looking at where the tip of the tail is, because some dogs don't even have tails, right? They might have just little nub heads. So we're really looking at that inch or two that stems off of their body. And even with dogs that have corkscrew tails, like maybe a Frenchie or Boston, you'll still see some movement in terms of it moving up a little bit higher when their muscles tighten versus relaxing. One myth that I want to kind of bust here, because it comes up a lot, is that a dog that's wagging its tail, that doesn't always mean that it's happy. And not uncommonly have I had people approach and say, oh, I had this incident where this dog was wagging its tail, and so I went to pet it, and maybe they got snapped at or somebody got bit. So again, we're looking at where the tail lies, and then that in conjunction with the rest of their body language. For example, if I have a dog that's standing very stiff with a tight closed mouth and their tail's up really high on their back and it's moving pretty fast, the example that I give people is think of like a rattlesnake, right? Rattlesnakes don't always wag their tails because they're happy. In fact, that's a warning signal, and in dogs we call it flagging. Now, it doesn't always necessarily mean a warning is something bad. Sometimes it's just information in terms of their arousal level or how excited they are.
The signs that Kristin and I are talking about today, most of these will take place, not always, but a lot of the time you're going to see a lot of this body language take place before you see the bigger behaviors of barking, lunging, growling, really kind of the reactivity. So the more we learn to identify how our dogs are feeling, particularly when they might be alerting on something or feeling a little bit stressed or feeling a little bit of concern or flat out fear,
Correct.
when we can find those little signs early, then that's their way of telling us, hey, I'm not super comfortable, give me some distance, help me get out of the situation, or help me understand the situation a little bit better. Kristin talked about the whole body and how all of these parts, play in together, and she just mentioned something that's really important, and that is the carriage of the body and the body position. So a happy, relaxed dog is going to be just like us, loose, hanging, chilling. We might put our hips out. If your dog is on the ground in a nice down position, if all four are tucked under and he's real tight or she's real tight, they may be relaxed, but a better sign of being relaxed is going to be that hip out, just like for us.
Yeah, correct. Something else that we could talk about in terms of body is actually something that happens with their coat, which many of you probably have seen before, when their hackles go up. So the term that we use for that in the dog community is something called pilo. To me, the best way that I can describe that to somebody is that's the dog's sort of physiological way of presenting the fact that they're uncomfortable about something. So again, if your dog gets startled by something, or maybe they're greeting a dog that they're unfamiliar with, you might see their hackles go up. A lot of times it might be accompanied with some other behaviors, maybe even growling if they're that uncomfortable. But a lot of dogs will do it even though the rest of their body may be kind of wiggly, and maybe they're approaching the other dog and the rest of them looks like they're content and happy. But really, if we're seeing those hackles up, that's a sign that maybe they're not truly as comfortable as we think that they are. In that circumstance, what I would advise doing is just giving your dog a little bit of space from whatever it is that they're trying to interact with, maybe to give them a chance to cool off and settle down. Something that I'll let Ellen get into in a second is when you do allow them to move away, or after they interact with that, you may also see what we call a shake-off, which is when they shake their body like they're wet, but they weren't. And actually, while Ellen's talking, I bet if I pet Simon a little too much, he'll probably offer that for you.
And you guys saw that last month with Skittles. Skittles was able to join us, and we talked a little bit about his story. And he had an incident. There was somebody coming behind the bush, and he barked, and it startled him a little bit. And then once he was, realized he was okay and he was going to be okay, he did that shake off. And there we go.
So Simon shakes off a lot, and it's pretty predictable. He gets a little overwhelmed with too much touching or too much interaction. So even though his body language was happy, I wouldn't say that he was uncomfortable, but to him he was sort of like, whoa, I need a little bit of a break from all that hands-on action.
And I bet you a lot of you, when you're walking the dogs, after you put the harness on, or maybe even just clipping the leash, very common for the dogs to shake off. And they're like, okay, I've just got my equipment on and had to go through that, but I'm ready for my walk.
Yeah.
So when you're out on the walk, some of the behaviors to look for when you know your dog is comfortable on the walk would be really comfortable smelling, their nose to the ground, and exploring the environment. That's a great behavior to see, and that's a sign that can let you know that your dog is enjoying the walk. Certainly a nice loose lead will also tell you that the dog is comfortable. Sometimes the lead is tight, because they're happy and they're excited and they're eager to get out and check out the world. Sometimes the leash is tight because they're really uncertain and they're a bit concerned on the walk, and they'll be what we call hypervigilant. So if you see your dog's walking and the dog never smells and is doing a lot of this and a lot of maybe panting along with it, then we know that the dog is probably not super comfortable on that walk and is on high alert. So take a look at the body language on the walks as well. Take a look at your dog's tails. Take a look at your dog's ears. We touched very briefly on that. But when a dog will alert onto something, oftentimes they may stop, or you'll definitely see that everything gets just a little bit higher, just a little bit taller. Those ears may go just a little bit more forward. Their eyes may get a little bit bigger. Their mouth may go from open to closed. Their body may get a little more still. What else would happen, Kristin?
Well, it kind of depends on the dog. Obviously, if it was something that they're really uncomfortable with, that might then escalate further into some barking or lunging, perhaps, if you're really too close to something that they're uncomfortable with. Other times, they might just pick up on something, maybe a squirrel, right, in the distance, and they perk up and it kind of gets tall, like Ellen talked about, and they alert to it. And then when the squirrel runs off, you see everything kind of deflate and relax again. So, again, I mean, we're always looking at the context of the situation. I'll give you a perfect example right now. If I bring a tennis ball out, Bentley will probably perk up and get all excited, and you'll see his tail go up. Because to him, tennis balls are pretty exciting. So you see his tail went up, his ears are up, his mouth is closed tight. Obviously, it's not that he's uncomfortable. He's just anticipating something happening with this toy. So again, if somebody describes to us, oh, our dog's really stiff and, alert, we're always going to look at, well, what's happening around them? What are they interacting with in the environment that might be causing that? And then go from there to determine what might actually be happening with the dog.
Great questions. Really, really wonderful questions, or comments.
Sure.
But we'd love to get some questions
Speaking
for
of
you.
questions.
So if you've got any questions, certainly, let us know, and we'll be happy to answer them.
Yeah, I think we might have a couple on there already, so we'll let Will here go ahead and read them for us.
So how can someone know whether or not it's safe to approach a dog to pet it?
Well, I would always start by making sure that you ask the owner, and that's something that not a lot of people do too often. I'll let you address the start of that, and then I want to talk about how to approach a dog for petting, because that can make a big difference too in the response.
Great question. Petting is really reinforcing to us as humans. Most of us who have dogs love to touch on our dogs. Not all dogs, though, love to be touched. So even before you think about approaching a dog, think about, is it really necessary for me to touch that dog? Do I really need to touch that strange dog? If the answer is still yes, as Kristin said, be sure to ask first. My little suggestion is, if the handler on lead says, yeah, sure, I would not, because that's a sign of hesitation, of uncertainty. But if they're like, yeah, sure, he's great, it's best to let the dog come to you versus you entering into the dog's space. So if the dog doesn't come towards you to be touched or to interact with, that's okay. It's nothing personal. That dog just doesn't want to do that day, in that time, in that place. That's all it means.
I was going to say, and that being said, just because a dog approaches you doesn't always mean they want to be touched either. And this is something that unfortunately happens quite a bit with maybe our clients who have fearful dogs, as the dog is curious about a new person and brave enough to maybe go up to the person to sniff, but if the person suddenly reaches down or leans over, it can startle the dog, and that's actually a really good way to get bit. Again, so I would make sure that you ask, and if you're going to invite a dog into your space, rather than reach to them, I always say, I don't know who told people to greet dogs by sticking their hand in their face to smell them, right? Well, guess what? The dog can smell you really far away, so they already have all of that information that they need. And a lot of times invading their space in such an intrusive way, it'd be like me doing that to Ellen. And,
I'm used to her doing that.
Yes, all the time. Not everybody appreciates that, though, and neither do the dogs. And so rather than go to them, invite them into your space, like I just did with Simon, where you can tap your leg maybe, wiggle your fingers near your body, and that way if he wants to come in for petting, he can come up Rather than reach over the head, I would maybe start under the chin or on their chest. Pet it for a few seconds and then take a break. I'll let Ellen talk about something that we call the 5-second rule and why that's important, especially when you're interacting with a dog that doesn't know you and you may not know that dog.
Yeah, so with the 5-second rule, so if everything's loose, you're reading that body, you've taken the tips from today's Facebook Live, and you're like, okay, this dog is cool for me to touch. First, start off by, as Kristin said, standing tall like a tree is often what we would recommend our clients, especially kids. Teach your kids, just stand tall like a tree. That's all they need to do. And then when you go to pet, underneath, not over or to the side, count to 5. For your kids, this is a great lesson for them to learn. I teach all the little kids in my life this. 1, 2, sometimes just 3 for little kids. 1, 2, 3, and stop. For adults, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and stop. Make it very brief. The dog will let you know if he or she would like more.
Yeah, and if you ever do reach towards a dog and they move away, that's obviously a pretty good sign that maybe they don't want that type of interaction. You know, for dogs that are fearful, something that I want to bring up, because I've had clients tell me that maybe they've been out on a walk with their fearful dog and somebody will ask to pet and they'll say, oh, you know, sorry, they're shy or they're a little bit afraid. But everybody wants to be that person that, oh, dogs love me and they're going to be my friend. And so they'll go, oh, it's okay, and, you know, lean over and look at the dog and talk to them. For a dog that's afraid, that's really intimidating. It's sort of like if you were to go into an elevator with somebody that creeped you out a little bit, you'd be a lot more comfortable if they just sort of ignored you than if they were in your face trying to talk to you and convince you to be their friend. So,
Thank you, Simon.
Body language will help you with that. Again, if you look at a dog and they seem tense or they're moving away or maybe they're fixated on you instead of having those soft eyes, maybe their mouth is you know, tight, maybe they're already barking at you.
A good tip, if somebody does say, oh, but I'm really good with dogs, what we advise our clients is just say, my dog is in training, so not today. Thank you very much for helping us. And that way the person still feels like they are involved because they are. They have helped. They have interacted with that dog simply by not physically coming towards the dog.
Correct.
Any other questions?
There's a comment from Joan. I can't see the full comment on the phone here, so I'm not sure if there's a question.
Okay, well, Joan, thanks for being with us today. We really appreciate you being here.
We have another question, actually.
And if we don't, Joan, if we don't answer your question live, we'll look for it online and we'll reply in a written comment.
What does it mean when your own dog places their paw on your foot while you're both standing?
Well, that could mean a couple different things. Some dogs just want to be close to you. You know, there are some dogs that might swoop in and strategically sit on you as a way to sort of, I call it keeping track of where you're at. You know, dogs that might have a history of guarding their person, and I don't necessarily mean protection. I can talk about that in a second. You know, might just be, that may be their way of just sort of being in possession of you, or they might just be hanging out. I know my dogs all the time accidentally step on my feet, or they'll just stop and stand there. I think some of them are more aware of their presence in your space than others. So I would say, you know, what does the rest of their body language look like when they're doing that? Maybe you can give us some insight if you're still on there of a situation where maybe that commonly happens with your dog.
Yeah, as Kristin was saying, take a look at the context and also the rest of the body language. If that always happens maybe when another dog approaches or another human comes near you and they put their body part on you and then they go sideways, there's a lot more to that. That's a pretty complex question and we don't want to offer up information that may not be 100% accurate for that dog.
Depending on everything else that's happening.
And one of the most important things that we did want to communicate today, and always, in whatever information that we put forth to you guys, is it's always best to make sure that you are working in tandem with your vet. Maybe that's just once a year, twice a year, but if you do have problem behavior, you want to make sure you're working not only with a really good veterinarian, or a veterinary behaviorist, if you're lucky enough to live in a city that has one. They often work remotely, so look into that as well. And a certified professional dog trainer using positive reinforcement. That is the methodology for both of us that we adhere to, and it's scientifically proven, and it's the best way to build a relationship, a wonderful, healthy, happy relationship. So the behavior that you see from your dog is going to be happy behavior. Any other questions?
What is the best way to keep my dog from going into fear mode when other dogs show up at the dog park?
Oh,
Well, to be honest, if your dog is acting fearful at the dog park, that may not be the best place for him or her. I don't know if the dog ever acts differently one-on-one when they're on leash just on a walk. But if, a dog park for some dogs can be pretty overwhelming, mostly because many of you probably take your dogs to dog park, and if you go in with one dog and you'll notice that the rest of them all kind of mob, that can be kind of an overwhelming environment. So I would say that if your dog is acting fearful of another dog, the best thing to do might be just to go out for a little bit and at least take a break and then try to come back in when they seem a little bit more relaxed. Or if it's something that happens consistently and you're seeing it get worse, seek out the help of either, like Ellen said, a certified professional dog trainer or a behavior consultant that might be able to help you determine other ways to socialize your dog so that they can be comfortable with that.
I would agree. I would say I would not go to the dog park anymore for that dog. There's a lot of great ways, and certainly if you're involved here with Fetch, you've got access to dog walkers and pet sitters and folks who can make sure your dog is receiving mental stimulation and engagement with the environment, engagement with other humans, and engagement with appropriate dogs. And that's going to go a long way towards helping to make sure your dog, doesn't continue to be fearful or have that fear turn into
Aggression. Yeah, and it's not to say that, some dogs we might remove from that environment temporarily while we work with them and socialize them in a more appropriate way and help them gain confidence around other dogs, and some of them might be able to return to an environment like that and do pretty well. Something to consider, though, on that topic is that just like not all dogs want to be touched all the time by humans, not all dogs appreciate that kind of environment. As a perfect example, Bentley here, you see, gets along pretty well with other dogs one-on-one or in small groups, but he's not really a dog that's comfortable in that type of environment, because for him, I see a lot of stress behaviors, and it starts to get too overwhelming for him. And then he gets to the point where he starts getting a little bit snarky with other dogs, right? He starts getting a little bit agitated because he's just too stressed to deal with it. So, just like most of us wouldn't take our kids that want to be chess players and make them play football, we can't always take our dogs and say, you're going to do this job, because not all of them want to do the things that we want them to do. So taking into account your dog's individual personality and their wants and needs is important too, so that they can stay happy and comfortable.
Good point.
Any tips to stop fence fighting with the neighbor dog?
Oh, sure. I have to do that at home. My dog Skittles is great with other dogs in a lot of different settings, but in our neighborhood, on one side of the fence, there's two dogs, and he loves to play with one of them, and the other one is very intimidating to him, simply because of size. The dog is a really, really nice dog, but he has a hard time when he hears that other dog going back and forth behind the fence. Interrupted. First of all, manage. We always have management in one hand and training in the other. And when we remove one, we kind of handicap ourselves. So management for me when it comes to Skittles is I've created almost a second fence, so he doesn't have the opportunity to go right up to that fence. So think about that. You can go to any of your hardware stores, home improvement stores, and get some wire fences, and usually that's enough, depending on the size of the dog, of course, to be a visual as well as a physical barrier so they don't get right up against the fence and stick their noses in there. The more they practice that behavior, the better they get at it, and the likelihood that they're going to transfer that outside of your yard. So best to make sure they don't get to practice the behavior. The second thing that I do for Skittles is I work really hard on his recall, like Skittles, come. And whenever he hears his cue to come into this house, he comes in, and I treat every single time. I never want him to think that when he comes into the house, I am not super appreciative of him interrupting, barking back and forth with that dog, and instead coming on in, because inside the house is going to be much better than hanging out at that fence. So that would be my two recommendations. Management, don't allow the physical contact with the actual fence if that's at all possible. Speak to your neighbor as well and ask your neighbor to do the same so the dogs don't have the opportunity to do that. work on a really, really strong recall. So if it does happen, if they happen to be outside and you start to hear that barking, they know as soon as they hear that cue to come on inside, get a high value reinforcement. Maybe it's tug with a toy, maybe it's a high value treat, and have a good time inside.
Yeah, and like Ellen touched on briefly too, prevention is the best aspect of this. Because even if our dogs are practicing it every day and able to come inside, if they're still doing it all the time, it's unlikely that that's going to decrease. So if you can prevent it altogether by, as Ellen stated, having a visual barrier so that they can't see the other dog on the other side of the fence, a lot of times that may stop it altogether. If it's just an auditory thing where maybe they hear the other dog over there or they hear the tags, do your best to maybe either coordinate with your neighbor and see if you can figure out times of the day when maybe their dog's not out there, and maybe that's the best yard time for your dog. Or if you go out there first and you hear the dog roaming around, maybe it's not the right time to let your dog out, or maybe you go out on a leash so that they can't run over and fence fight. But definitely if that does happen, as Ellen pointed out, having some good cues, whether it's a recall cue or we have another one, an emergency recall, we call it the treat party cue, to get your dog back to you safely would be important to at least minimize the amount of time that they're spending barking at the fence.
Yeah, to interrupt it. We call that barrier frustration, typically. And a lot of times, to dispel this myth, a lot of folks think that it's play and it's a great way for their dog to get exercise. And that is, I would say,
incorrect.
9 times out of 10, if not 10 times out of 10, that's not correct. So it's not play, it's not a great way to get exercise. It's actually just kind of building stress and building reactivity. Great question.
Frustration.
Clearly I can relate.
Any other questions?
Is there an alternative to using treats when training or trying to calm a dog?
Oh, yeah.
Of course. So, at the
Great
end of the
question.
day, reinforcement is in the eyes of the beholder, meaning you need to figure out what your dog actually likes. And I point that out because a lot of times just because we think something should be reinforcing to our dogs doesn't mean it actually is. I always tell my clients there's a big difference between reinforcements and rewards, and that confuses a lot of people because we usually think that it's the same. Rewards are defined by its form, toys, cookies, petting. Reinforcements are defined by their function. So if you're training your dog, regardless of what you're using, whether it's praise, whether it's a toy, whether it's access to the environment, if the behavior that you're trying to teach happens more frequently or maintains, then what you're using is actually reinforcing to your dog. But as an example, I'll have people say to me like, well, I don't want to use treats to train my dog. What else can I use? Well, it depends on what your dog actually likes and in that moment, because you might find that your dog likes some things at home and doesn't really care about those things once they get outside in a different environment. So I would say anything that your dog lights up over, if you bring out a certain toy and your dog gets pretty excited about it, or if you have one of those dogs that responds well to interaction and praise, you can use that, but we're always looking at what is going to get us to our goal. And sometimes that may mean that we have to use food with some dogs. It doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to use treats forever or that you have to have food on you all the time. And any good trainer will help you get to a place where your dog will be able to respond to behaviors even if you don't have any types of reinforcement on you. And that's just a matter of some good training.
Good training with the guardian. With the guardian.
And understanding your dog and their likes and dislikes.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that was a great answer, and figure out what your dog likes. And so it doesn't always have to be food, as Kristin was saying. It can be toys. Find out what lights them up and use that.
Yeah, sometimes certain cues might be reinforcing to your dog. So as an example, Bentley has lots of different tricks, and a lot of times for him, the opportunity to do certain tricks that he likes that are more play-oriented may be a reward for doing another behavior that I want. So, for example, maybe I have him sit and stay, and then the reinforcement is coming to me when he's called because he likes running. So you can get creative with it, but again, you always want to look at the product. So whether or not you're actually getting results by using praise or by using toys or by using food, whatever it is that you decide to use, are you actually getting what you want from your dog? And if the answer is no, you need to look at whatever you're offering, as pay for their behaviors, is it actually reinforcing to them?
And if you are concerned about using food, because that seems to be one that most dogs will respond to, not all, but most will respond to a high-value food item. If you're concerned about caloric intake, as you should, if you're feeding your dog out of a bowl, just take a look at how much is going into that bowl and then counteract that with how much training you're going to use or how often you're going to reinforce behavior with food. And then that way we don't have to be concerned about if they're getting too much.
Yeah, or if you have a puppy especially, or a young dog, or in Bentley's case, a dog that just really likes their food in general, you can use their meals for training too. Again, if they like it and it's valuable enough for the behavior that you're asking for. And that way, they have to eat anyways. You might as well use it to get something that you want.
Question?
Any tips to prevent a little dog from barking at guests in the house?
Well, regardless of size, the behavior that we want to take a look at, that barking, is it out of excitement? Is it out of fear? We want to work at developing calm behavior when guests come in. So it's kind of a complex question, and I want to be very cautious about how I'm answering it, and you can hear that in my voice.
Mostly because of the motive. Like Ellen said, we need to know why the dog is barking at guests, because if they are, under-socialized, or maybe they didn't practice having a lot of guests over when they were younger, more than likely they're responding that way because, the guests are new to them, and maybe it's creeping them out a little bit.
And take a look at your house too. If you happen to have like a very narrow hallway and the dogs don't have a lot of space, or if it's dark, or if you don't have a lot of visitors. My quick tip, and I'm sure Kristin's got another one as well, but my quick tip would be that when you know you're going to have guests come over, ask them to text you or call you before they arrive. And for dogs that have a lot of reactivity in the home, I would say a good general answer to this question would be have them greet outside on leash if you know that they're a little bit more comfortable outside. That can sometimes help remove the reactivity inside the home.
Yeah, and more specifically, I wouldn't do it right in front of your house.
Right.
So when we say outside, don't have your guests standing in your driveway and you pop
Or
out
on the
because
doorstep.
that's still really close to the home. So a lot of times, have your guests maybe park a house or two down, and that way you can go outside and meet in a more neutral area. A lot of times too, if we have our guests walk into the house first and then follow with the dogs, as Ellen said, sometimes you might bypass that barking altogether just because it's a different context than somebody just showing up in their space and coming in their house. Something else you can do too, if you have a dog that maybe isn't comfortable with people outside either, is again just use good prevention and management. Again, have your guests text or call before they get there, and maybe opt to put your dog away in another room with the TV on or the radio, and maybe a food puzzle like a stuffed Pong or a chew bone of some sort, just to kind of keep them entertained for a little while your guest's there, and that way we're not stressing them out unnecessarily. Something that I want to point out is even if you had 100 people over 100 different days in a row, if your dog's practicing that reactivity and they're practicing being afraid or practicing being stressed, as many people as you have come along, that's not going to make it get better. In fact, it's likely to get worse. So again, I would seek help from a trainer or a behavior consultant or even a veterinary behaviorist to really help you determine what exactly is going on, and then the best approach to get to a place where you could have a guest come in with your dog present and have them actually be okay with that.
You'll often hear us use to employ baby gates as well. They make some really beautiful gates, and they make some very functional gates that are secure, that allow the human to go through, and the dog as well. So if it helps sometimes just to have the dog further away from the door, and working with the trainer, you can help make a positive association of people coming in. That's going to be a great way to help work towards that problem. But complex behaviors like that, again, get with a certified professional dog trainer using positive reinforcement and your veterinarian, and go from there.
Exactly.
There's one more comment from Debbie. Sorry, I can't read the whole thing on here,
That's
so I'm not
okay.
sure if there's
Debbie,
a question
thanks
there.
for being here with us, though. We'll take a look at your comment when we wrap up here with our Facebook Live. We've so enjoyed being here with you today. Thank you you so much for checking in with us. Fetch is a great community of dog walkers and pet sitters. I know you guys work with all sorts of different animals, from hamsters and cats. Thanks for listening to us today talk about dogs and dog body language. We hope that you've learned a little bit more about what your dog's telling you, because
It's important.
It's important. They tell us a lot.
Yes, absolutely.
So I am Ellen, the dog trainer,
And I'm Kristin.
and we'll see you again. Fetch, thanks again.